Now with today's main headlines. Korean scholar emphasizes need for true understanding of Islam in sustainable cooperation. Non-violence calls for investigations condemning crimes of Israeli army against journalists in Gaza. Addressing Islamophobia, the White House's strategy and Muslim American skepticism. Human traffickers prey on Rohingya refugee women in Kashmir. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. This is Hussein Jawad watching Shia Waves live from Imam Hussein TV 3 in London. Speaking at the 42nd Sharjah International Book Fair, Korean scholar Lee Hee-so has called for a true understanding of Islam in a true manner and sustainable cooperation. Islam is not just a religion, it teaches coexistence and its people have noble ethics. A leading authority on the Middle East and Islamic studies in Korea, Professor Lee's book in the Korean language, Islam for Children, has sold over 200,000 copies. His Islam and Korean Culture is a classic which is available in 5 languages, including Arabic. Professor Lee, who has lived in Turkey for 12 years and found vast similarities in the cultures of the Arab and Korean peninsula, felt that the exchanges had to continue like it has done in the past 1200 years through trade and commerce. Free Muslim calls for investigations condemning crimes of Israeli army against journalists in Gaza. The World Non-Violence Organization, Free Muslim, has called on international organizations, agencies and bodies concerned with the global security and peace to take urgent action to conduct transparent investigations that consider the evidence and documents that condemn the crimes against journalists in Gaza. The organization released its letter viewed by Shia Waves agency on the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. Human rights statistics indicate that 38 journalists were killed during the ongoing war in Gaza in recent days. In its letter, the organization stated that the international community marks on November 2nd of each year the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, coinciding with the killing of 38 journalists in Gaza during October due to the Israeli army's disregard for the rules and laws of war, including the protection of civilians and journalists. It explained that the Israeli army did not care about any legal considerations or sanctity before carrying out indiscriminate killings that targeted dozens of journalists working in the Gaza Strip, in addition to thousands of innocent civilians who also fell victim to the continuous bombing for weeks. The non-violence organization urges the importance of stopping all violence in Gaza and asks for immediate medical assistance for the wounded, food and nutrition for civilians, and ceasefire to allow for a path of dialogue. Numerous attempts by human rights organizations have been done, but unfortunately attacks, bombing and destruction continues as people lose family members, journalists are targeted on the streets, and hospitals have also become part of the battleground instead of a safe haven for the wounded and medical staff. We have with us Mujtaba Akhwand, Executive Director of Free Muslim Association, all the way from Washington, D.C. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you for being with us on the show today. I have a few questions for you. In light of the ongoing war on the Gaza Strip, how do you see the international community's reaction towards the crimes being committed against the civilians?
Yes, that's a key question, and we have to take a look at this question and focus on the neighboring countries and how their reaction has been. Unfortunately, I think the neighboring countries, they're having a political reaction as opposed to humanitarian reaction toward what's happening, and there's a first and secondary priority here. And keep in mind that whoever controls the social media and the narrative overall wins this conflict. And media coverage from Gaza and from people who are supporting the cause is very poor, and unfortunately, the countries are just waiting around to they may say things and they may voice things, but they're waiting around to see how the conflict goes through in order to pick sides and choose how they're gonna ensure their gain in this chaos. And just
Yep.
to end on this question, civilian support is mainly to gain social media support, and it's not truly to attend to the civilians.
Okay, thank you. And in your own opinion, why is the Israeli army targeting journalists who are reporting the deplorable situation in the Gaza Strip?
As for Muslim, I have to say first, we denounce any attack on any journalist from any sides. That's generally said. But what we have seen on the ground is the journalists are the the ones that share the raw footage of what happens on the ground. And any country that is involved, they would like to control this narrative, the social media narrative, and what footage comes out. And attacking journalists attacks these roots of getting information out exactly as it happens on the ground. And Israel doesn't like that. Other countries that may want to control the narrative do not like that. And we denounce anything that happens to these journalists because they are the eyes of the public and they should be
Yeah.
kept safe. And any side should allow journalists to do their jobs. And this is for all staff of media members.
Okay. And are the victims in Gaza receiving sufficient assistance and support from Arab and other world countries as the Israeli army continues targeting key humanitarian facilities?
Yeah, and I want to, and this is another great question. I want to split that into two folds. One is humanitarian aid in forms of food and perhaps medical assistance. Those are happening here and there. Majority of people are not receiving the food because by the time it gets to the actual civilians who have lost their
Yep.
houses and gone to refugee camps and elsewhere, or try to find shelter in places that they're not even sure if it's going to be bombed next. Because now, as we have seen, schools are not safe, hospitals are not safe, libraries are not safe, regular buildings are not safe, apartments are not safe. So people are confused and in shock. So one fold of it is the humanitarian food and medical assistance that somewhat is being done. The second fold of it, which in my opinion is very important, is these people are in mental shock of what is happening. So a proper shelter is needed. Some sort of support group is needed for them to find someone to live with or to kind of find some sort of a peace in order to get through these days is very important. And many of the countries are thinking of closing their borders. Many of the countries are still debating what to be done. The civilians should be taken away from, because there is no respect for civilian areas. The civilians should be spared from the conflict zones. And both the conflicts, one, we urge them to uh, spare the lives of civilians, the children, the women, the journalists, staff of media, the first responders, doctors, medics, and spare their lives and keep away using and misusing those places as shelters. And hence we see bombings happening in those places. So people are able to find a place to find some sort of a peace when they do go through this crisis.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming on Shia Waves today and discussing these important issues at the moment that is happening in Israel and Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
And now, on other news, the White House has unveiled their strategy to combat the deeply rooted issue of Islamophobia in the United States. This comprehensive plan aims to address discrimination and prejudice against Muslim Americans. The White House approach comprises of multiple components, including increasing public awareness, fostering interfaith dialogue, and reforming policies to combat discrimination and hate crimes against Muslim Americans. Despite these efforts, skepticism persists within the Muslim American community. Many remain cautious due to a history of unfulfilled promises and a lack of consultation within the community in developing the strategy. Concerns also linger about the effectiveness of policy implementation and enforcement, which may not lead to the desired impact. We have now with us Mustafa Abidi from New York, who is the director for Muslim for Peace organization. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Apologies, Abu Talib Muhammad. Apologies on that. How are you today?
No worries. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on our show today. Do you think this strategy will help Muslims?
Yeah, so recently, since we've seen so many attacks on Muslims in the US and in Europe, I think it's a step in the right direction. And that's what everybody, all of our leaders are talking about in the US. It's definitely a step in the right direction to keep Muslims safe and keep the image of Islam safe in the US as well. Muslims are under attack from all angles in the US and all corners of the US, and it's very important that we move swiftly to have our concerns recognized by our lawmakers. With that being said, there's still work to be done, and we look forward to building on this policy to ensure that our communities remain safe and our further generations stay safe as well as Muslims here.
Yep. And why is there so much reservations regarding this at the moment?
I think it's more the timing of this announcement. For quite some time, Muslims have felt ignored. We've been engaging our officials a lot to recognize Islamophobia, and there's been countless attacks on Muslims since 9/11. Personal attacks on our communities, attacks on our mosques. And now that there's such a big conflict in the Middle East, now that Muslims have been engaging our lawmakers, our officials, they've come out with this announcement. So it appears that maybe this announcement has been made to settle the dust a bit, to make Muslims happy. But it's still a step in the right direction. And as well, along with that, even though this announcement has been made, even though Islamophobia has been recognized by the government, the current administration is still establishing policies that are blatantly anti-Islamic. They're affecting Muslims within the US and around the world. And it is understood that our politicians have a broad community to represent, but it's also very important that our values as Muslims are acknowledged and the global Muslim community is not negatively affected by the policies of our government either.
Yeah. And if you could tell us, please, in detail, what is your opinion on what should be done?
Sure. So I think before we set expectations from our political leaders, we as Muslims need to get involved and show our value to the community at large. Unfortunately, the reality is that our values are not relevant, and the relevance of our values is dependent on our political presence. If we don't establish this presence in our broad communities, then we have no place in the decisions that are being made by our leaders. So the best place to start is by having a presence in our local communities, our local governments, and supporting Muslim candidates to hold positions in Board of Education, City Council, and then from there we can grow to have more of an influence in our state governments and the federal government as well. For example, our organization, we've supported so many candidates that have run for office, that hold office, and we help to connect numerous Muslims in the New Jersey and New York area with their local lawmakers and their local officials. We maintain a positive relationship with all these government officials, and whenever we need to raise awareness about anything affecting Muslims, we have those relationships in place to have our voices heard by our leaders. So that's the best place to start, and it's definitely a step in the right direction, like I said. But we still have a lot of work to do, and the best way to get started on that and the best way to continue that is to get involved ourselves, because we can't expect anybody else to care about our values until we move forward and we make those issues heard by the community.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today and answering our questions, and inshallah we'll have you on soon again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now let's remind our respective viewers of today's main headlines. Korean scholar emphasizes need for true understanding of Islam and sustainable cooperation. Non-violence calls for investigations condemning crimes of Israeli army against journalists in Gaza. Addressing Islamophobia, the White House strategy and Muslim American skepticism. Also tonight, Pakistani academic stresses necessity of guidance from Holy Quran for Islamic financing. German news agency DW has published an article on the deplorable conditions of some Rohingya women lured by human traffickers into a miserable life in India-administrated Kashmir's villages. These young women were trafficked from an overcrowded refugee camp in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar with the promise of a better life in Kashmir and marriage to well-settled men. Struggling with mental health problems, they tell us of being harassed and abused by the traffickers before being sold and married off to aggressive men. They have since had to struggle even for their basic needs. I have had no contact with my family since then. I feel alone here with no one to grieve me even if I die. One of them has said, at present there are over 40,000 Rohingya living in India, nearly 6,000 of them in camps in Jammu. Over 200 Rohingya people are being held in different detention centres across India. According to media reports, the Rohingya are mostly Muslim minority with Myanmar's Rakhine state. They have faced decades of persecution and violence in the Southeast Asian nation. And now we continue with some short news. The Holy Karbala-based Misbah al-Hussein Foundation for Relief and Development, one of the centers affiliated to the Office of the Supreme Religious Authority, His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sadiq al-Hussein Shirazi, has continued its food distribution project. This humanitarian project aims at delivering food baskets to hundreds of orphans and needy people, and is often carried out in cooperation with the mayors and officials in the holy city of Karbala. In this regard, Mr. Hussein al-Adili, head of the Public Relations Office, explained that the foundation distributed 170 meat rations to orphans in more than one district. Al-Adili called on all benefactors to contact the foundation and support its humanitarian and service projects that it provides to families of orphans and the needy in Holy Karbala and other cities. Record-breaking rain produced floods in vast swath of Italy's Tuscany region as Storm Ciarán pushed into the country overnight, trapping residents in their homes, hospitals and cars overturning. After 200 milliliters of rain fell in a 3-hour period, at least 5 people were killed, bringing the storm's death toll in Western Europe to 12 on Friday. In France, 5 people were killed by falling trees and some 1.2 million homes lost electricity as the storm lashed the northwest coast on Thursday. Storm Ciarán battered Western Europe with record winds of up to 200 kilometers per hour, causing travel mayhem with closed ports, flights cancelled, and rail disruption. Uganda says it has captured the leader of an ISIS-linked military unit it blames for killing 2 foreign tourists and their local guide in a national park last month, Al Jazeera reported yesterday. The military chief, known as Njovu, was detained on Tuesday during a raid in which 6 members of his squad were killed, the government said on Thursday. The military men belong to the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, an ISIS-affiliated group based in the neighboring Democratic Republic of the Congo. The group has allegedly killed scores of civilians this year. Pakistan's election oversight body on Thursday postponed the country's upcoming parliament elections for the second time, saying the vote will take place on February 8th. However, the country's main opposition party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI), and its leader, former Prime Minister Imran Khan, having faced months of a nationwide crackdown, concerns have been raised about whether the caretaker government and the ECP are capable of holding fair elections. The political uncertainty in Pakistan has become at a time of economic instability. The country was hit by a balance of payments crisis as it tried to service high levels of external debt and deal with crushing inflation before the International Monetary Fund granted a $3 billion bailout package in June. An explosion targeting police in northwest Pakistan killed 5 people on Friday, and rescue and police officials. But there was no immediate claim of responsibility. The bomb exploded close to a police patrol in Dera Ismail Khan city, a police official said, and according to rescue officials, 21 suffered wounds. Pakistan has witnessed an uptick in terror activities in recent months, especially in KP and Balochistan, after the TTP ended its ceasefire with the government in November last year. The chairman of Benzer Income Support Program, BISP, Dr. Muhammad Amjad Saqib, on Thursday underlined the importance of practicing the guidance from the Holy Quran in order to establish Islamic financing principles. Dr. Saqib made these remarks during his address at the 3-day international conference on advancing Islamic finance, organized by Allama Iqbal Open University, Center for Excellence in Islamic Finance, and Institute of Management Sciences, Peshawar. He highlighted the correlation between the Sustainable Development Goals outlined by the United Nations and the teachings of the Quran, emphasizing that it is the religious duty of individuals and societies to work towards achieving these goals. He stressed that the interest is prohibited in Islam and that Islamic financing encompasses everything except interest-based loans. Dr. Saqib also noted that providing interest-free loans is in line with Islamic values, underscoring that it is not a burden on the dignity of the recipients, but a means to empower them. We have reached the end of today's Shia Waves show. Let's remind our dear viewers of today's headlines. Korean scholar emphasizes need for true understanding of Islam in sustainable cooperation. Non-violence calls for investigations condemning crimes of Israeli army against journalists in Gaza. Addressing Islamophobia, the White House's strategy and Muslim American skepticism. In Kashmir, human traffickers prey on Rohingya refugee women. Pakistani academic stresses the necessity of guidance from Holy Quran for Islamic financing. You can view the latest news on our Shia Waves website and get the news of your city or country to be published on our news agency. Contact the numbers at the bottom of the screen. This is the end of today's news. Thank you very much for watching. We pray to Allah Almighty to hasten the appearance of the Master of our time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I am the sun, the star at the center of your universe. I am a wondrous threat made of hydrogen and helium, marveled by poets and